Joyce Taylor, Chief Engineer of the great Maine DOT. Welcome to InfraTalk America.
Thank you.
We're so pleased to have you here this morning. And as you know, we've been having a series of conversations with officials like you from around the country over the last day and a half. And we're getting some very interesting observations. Now, you are, I'd first like to just ask you to give us a little bit of background. I know what you were doing in 2002 when I arrived to serve as Deputy Commissioner, but your career has taken you all the way to the Chief Engineer's office. So just give us a little sense of how you got there.
I had no vision that I would be Chief Engineer, I can tell you that. I'm a chemical engineer by education. And then after a year of work with chemicals, I decided I really didn't like working with chemicals. So I had to sort of regroup on what my life was going to be for work. My dad was a contractor, so I was really comfortable in construction, and I was DEP's first stormwater engineer. Took a break to have my kids, and DOT was in trouble at the time with DEP over stormwater issues, so they hired me as a consultant. I ended up...
And when was that?
Oh, geez. I think it was like 94.
Okay, so mid-90s.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yep.
And it just kind of worked my way up. I loved working in construction, which I was always out on construction projects with stormwater. And at that time, I didn't have any power or authority over anyone. And back then, environmental stuff, everyone's like, what are we doing? And I had to, I learned how to get people to basically do what I needed them to do without bossing them around. And it just kind of grew from there, and I held various positions. And but I always learned, along the way, which was really like the best part of this job is you do something different every day. And
in project development, you served, I think when I arrived in early 2000s, you were assistant director of the Office of Project Development.
Yeah.
Which was responsible for delivering all the projects, Maine DOT, including the local aid projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I presume that broad experience was key to preparing you to serve as Chief Engineer.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think you need to be sort of a generalist as a Chief Engineer and know a little bit about everything. But I think most of all, you need to learn to listen to people. Every time I've gotten a promotion, I've always said I have to listen a little harder because people tell you the truth as they know it. They're not really trying to leave facts out, but they assume you know what they know. And I don't, right? Because I'm not as involved in the individual projects or the things they do. And
you are, of course, the first woman ever to serve as Chief Engineer of the Maine Department of Transportation.
Yeah.
Which is an achievement unto itself, only because back in the early part of your career, it was harder then.
It was harder then. Yeah, it was. But, I think because my dad owned a construction company, I was used to kind of the back and forth with the guys in the field. And like if someone yelled at me, I'm like, okay, whatever. Well, I've heard it before.
It all prepared you so well, because I think it's fair to say that you're not considered any kind of a shrinking violet. I've learned that in working with you over the years, and my favorite Joyce Taylor story, you know it.
Yeah.
Again, I'm serving as Deputy Commissioner, and you came in to brief me on an idea. And the idea was to take about 21 miles of concrete interstate, the only concrete interstate we had in the entire state of Maine. It was in its 40s or 50s years old at that point. And you came in to propose a unique solution. Why don't you explain what that solution was? Well, and then I'll do the color commentary.
So you have to understand, in Maine, Interstate 295 is our primary route for tourists, and we are a tourist state, right? And so we were having issues where the concrete was breaking up, and literally people's tires were spinning it through car windshields, and it was dangerous. And we thought, okay, we can do this over 3 years at the time, or we can do it in a season if we close it down. And there was another road parallel to the interstate that was there before the interstate.
Served that function
And
back
we
before.
said, let's close the interstate. And I think you thought I was joking. I think you actually said, are you joking?
Again, folks, during tourist season.
And so, of course, LL Bean is really important to Maine. And you were like, you have to call LL Bean.
That was our first meeting.
And then I remember we talked to them. It was all fine. And at the last hour, LL Bean calls like the governor. And they go, we didn't think DOT was serious. And I will give them credit because I called them out and said, really? We came to talk to you. And literally the day before, you woke up. And they're like, yeah, we own that.
So Joyce Taylor comes to us with this idea and persuades us. It makes complete and total sense. And we went to the businesses in the coastal corridor, who obviously are all dependent on tourism, and explain that to them. You get 3 years of complete frustration, or 1 year we just get it done. Yeah. And they agreed in the end. And now we had to convince the governor.
Yes.
And that's my favorite part of the story. So the commissioner and myself and Joyce goes up to the governor's office, and you brought a box of...
I carried this box of all the concrete from the interstate with me in my car for like a year.
We call them props. So she brings the box into the governor's office and then proceeds to put it on his desk, the governor's desk. And there's a bit of a mishap. And the crumbling concrete sort of spills all over his desk.
I dropped the box on the governor's desk.
I think she did it on purpose.
I did, and he did. I looked at Greg, and the governor's eyes got wide open because it just kind of went poof, and it just disintegrated. And he goes to me, is that what happens on the road? I go, yes, sir, that's it. I mean, I rolled with the punch. Yep. And Greg is looking at me like, seriously? And
I said, done. Perfect. Great approach. So it was, and basically it went off like without a hitch. It was exactly the right thing to do. So effective. You did it on the other side the following year, I think, or the year after.
Yeah. I think one thing I learned from that, that was the first time I ever met with a governor. Not my last time, but it's really interesting because the engineering field, governors respect engineers.
Absolutely.
And when you tell them something, even if they don't want to hear it, you may get questioned. But all of them that I've met to a T have said, you're an engineer. I'm not going to override what you think is right.
And that was exactly Governor Baldacci's position in the end.
Yeah, that's what he said, basically.
I think he thought it made complete sense. But but the fact that, and that's why you were there presenting it, because you're exactly right. And I've long believed that, not being an engineer myself, the credibility of the engineer is so important to policymakers, whether it's legislative or executive. So, and you've been very successful in amassing a lot of credibility in the state of Maine, and you're a key advisor to the current governor, and really represented the Maine DOT and the governor when Governor Mills was first elected on basically her climate change initiative. So. Can you talk a little bit about what you're excited about in terms of the work Maine DOT is doing and you're doing on climate change with the Mills administration?
I mean, I think I say all the time, whether you believe in climate change, you probably believe climate is changing. Take the politics out of it. I mean, I went to an AASHTO maintenance conference and kicked off the meeting, and I said that, and every state was nodding their head. At the time, Vermont was going through terrible flooding issues, but regardless of your state, whether it's heat or dust or flooding, we're all experiencing it and responding to it. So we're the first responders in many times, to climate issues. And so I think from the Maine DOT point of view, yes, we're involved in the electrification, the charging stations, because all the federal money is coming through us. But I think resiliency is a really important issue. And, for us, we're having issues inland. Coastal, there are coastal issues. We don't necessarily close roads on the coast. Where we're closing them is inland. And I think everyone talks about sea level rise, but these quick hitting storms with big amounts of rainfall are a huge issue for us. And we've lost a lot of culverts over the last 3 or 4 years. Some big detours, like 60-mile detours for people, significant detours. And
Emergency response,
Yeah.
school buses,
And we're-
real
yeah.
life issues.
yeah, we're lucky at this point. I mean, people are still driving through, and there may not be a culvert there. I mean, they could go get washed down, and so it's a public safety issue. It's a life issue in that, if you have to go an hour out of your way to get from wherever you want to go to your house, big deal. So we've changed all of our design standards for culverts. We used to design to 25-year storms. Now we're designing to 100-year storms. And even sea level rise, we're saying, okay, what's predicted by the Climate Council's Science and Technical Committee is a 4-foot sea level rise. So we're using that on the coast. We're trying to look at some of our causeways and lift them up 4 feet. And so we're pretty proactive at looking at some of our road situations and trying to replace culverts too with, they're much bigger than they used to be. We size them bigger, but we think it's a win-win for both fish passage, which is a big issue in Maine. We have endangered species, so we have to deal with that, as well as just making sure public safety that culvert's going to stay in place.
And Maine, of course, is the home of the University of Maine, the Advanced Composites, the Advanced Structures and Composites Center that invented a bridge technology that Maine.Dot has really pioneered over the last dozen years or so. And you talk about, climate and resiliency, and one of the things that we have at InfraTalk America, one of our targeted technology sectors is sustainable composite structures. And the ability to utilize materials that don't corrode. And as Dr. Habib Dagher, the director of the center, says, you really get 2 bridges for the price of one. Because and I particularly use local governments as an example, because it is essential. Matter of fact, it won't happen as a practical matter otherwise, that state DOTs go through the process of really understanding the technology, utilizing it, demonstrating it, adopting specifications, whatever their process dictates, in order to unlock the market for local governments. Because the problem with local governments, they could build painted steel girders or even concrete, reinforced with steel, the typical materials used to build small to medium-sized bridges to this day. And I look at that and I say, well, the problem with building a 75-year bridge is local governments invariably do not have the resources to properly maintain it for that length of time, which is essential to grow it to existing for that long. So you're really looking at, as a practical matter, bridges after 40 years having to be either substantially rehabbed or replaced. So how do we, and the overarching question we've been asking our guests is, how do we move innovation in the Federal Aid Highway Program? Because it's 52 institutions who have 52 different ways of doing things and 52 sets of biases. So going door to door nationwide to advance technology, I've learned, especially over the last 5 years in my private sector roles, it's really difficult. So as chief engineer, you're vice chair of a major committee here at AASHTO. You're have to leave in a few minutes to go help run that meeting. Just observations. How do you, especially something as significant as a set of materials used to build a bridge, which is, and I understand, needs to be considered very carefully, but there's over 50 bridges in the country in about 14 states. So and in Maine, of course, has the most number of University of Maine technology composite bridges. So how do we break through? How do we get the word out that there's a real opportunity here, even if it's opening the door for local governments to put a bridge in that they don't have to worry about for 100 years? Nor do they have to spend money maintaining it, because they're relatively maintenance-free, because composites, again, don't corrode. So how do we make that case? How do we move that along?
I think what I believe is the practitioners have to really get the word out, because the bridge engineers listen to other bridge engineers. And I think, using the AASHTO structure, like the Committee on Bridges, and having them make presentations, having them say, the chief engineer, the commissioner, the governor, they're not making us use this, but they're using it because they want to. And in our case, our bridge engineers are using the technology because they want to. We're not telling them they have to do it. It's not political. It's just their choice.
And some of them came through the University of Maine engineering program and understand the technology certainly better than most people in the country.
And they believe in it. And I think from exactly what you're saying, the longevity piece, and, we're a coastal state, so we have salt water. And so this is a really big deal. Some of our bridges with the most traffic have saltwater intrusion. So, being able to use the composite is a big deal. I also think with all of the climate stuff that's going on, being able to tell the story that this is a less carbon intensive manufacturing process is important. So I think all of that is key. But I think, getting like the bridge engineers at Maine DOT to give presentation at a AASHTO bridge meeting and being part, we encourage our employees to be part of the AASHTO structure. Get involved, be part of a committee. I think Maine has sometimes an outsized voice because we really do participate in AASHTO on the committees, and that gives us an ability to be heard, right?
Yep.
And I think that's part of it, is that it is hard to break into a market as somebody who's manufacturing something if you don't have one of the DOTs helping to push, because, we are conservative about accepting new materials for a reason. We want to make sure that they work. But I think in the past, DOTs haven't necessarily helped carry the ball. But in our case, we are trying to help because we do believe it's a good technology and we want to see it used. And, from like I said, a carbon reduction point of view, I think it's a good technology.
And to underscore your point, as you know, Ken Sweeney, a good friend of yours, and I think you succeeded him as chief engineer at Maine DOT, a 35-year career at Maine DOT, and Ken has spent the last 10 years involved in the industry. So he has become an important messenger because he was so widely respected around the country. And I look at your trajectory and the role you're playing at AASHTO, and you've similarly achieved real national prominence and frankly, influence. And I mean that in a positive sense. You're a voice that's heard, believed, and understood among your peers. And that's great for Maine, but it's also great for the nation because AASHTO serves a critical role.
Yeah.
And the role you've played in it and the positions you've held and now vice chair of really a committee of chief engineers from around the country. So I know you've got to go and help share that meeting.
Yes.
I just very much enjoyed this conversation.
Oh,
I knew I would. And our goal is to try and do this every now and then and keep track of what you're doing. And every now and then we'll just find out what's going on in Maine and around the country, because you're in a very good position to understand all of that.
Well, what's fun is being chief engineer. You literally work on something new every day, which is really a great job to have.
Well, Maine DOT is a great institution, if I do say so.
I think so too.
Great memories, and no question, my experience there is what led me to Washington and Federal Highway. So, my best to Commissioner Van Note and Governor Mills, and thank you for your service, and good luck for the rest of the conference.
Thank you.